Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now, when I originally reviewed the GTX 1630 a few weeks ago, I came to the conclusion that while I liked the palette card itself, the whole GTX 1630 in terms of just existing, well, it didn't really make much sense, and I find it hard to justify recommending the purchase of one unless it was to go on sale for less than $100 or pounds or euros. Now, during that video I said I'd make a more in-depth comparison against a couple of other cards, and in today's one I wanted to compare its performance to the GTX 1050 Ti and the 2GB GTX 1050 to see how these three compare with each other when it comes to running a few of my favourite games. So without further ado, let's get into it and see where the 1630 fits in amongst some of the Nvidia classics. Okay, so the cards I'm using are standard edition cards, no overclocked models. We have the Palette GTX 1630 Dual 4GB, the Palette GTX 1050 Storm X 2GB, and the Asus EX GTX 1050 Ti 4GB. This is the standard Expedition card and not the overclocked model. For our first result, we have Cyberpunk 2077 at 1080p. Now, for all of the tests today, I've used sensible settings that you'd probably be looking at using with any of these three cards in the real world, which consist of mainly low and medium presets. First of all, Cyberpunk 2077 here. The GTX 1630 actually came out on top with 37 FPS at native 1080p. The 1050 Ti followed behind with 32 FPS, and the 2GB 1050 managed to just scrape 30 frames per second. The 1.1% lows also decrease in that order as well. So this was a nice first test. Now for Elden Ring with the low preset, again at 1080p, we have the 1050 Ti on top with 50 frames per second, the 1630 following behind with 41, and the 1050, again, it's quite impressive what it can do with just 2 gigs of RAM in 2022, but we saw 35 FPS. The 1.1% lows here were fairly similar across the board, though the 1630 does suffer a little bit in terms of that average overall. It's closer to the 1050 than it is the 1050 Ti, at least with these settings and with my i5 12400F system. Of course, results will vary depending on the resolutions and the in-game settings that you personally choose. In Far Cry 6 I got what I expected to see with the 1050 Ti on top once again, the 1630 in the middle and the 1050 on the bottom. Again, the 1630 was closer to the 1050 in terms of an average, but where the 1630 sort of pulls ahead in a way is that it does offer a much better 0.1% low. Although the 1050 seems capable in this game, the 0.1% low does let it down a bit and it indicates more stutters and frame drops. The 1630 sits closer to the 1050 Ti in that regard. Now, the way I've ordered the on-screen graph, chart, whatever you want to call it, is I've put the best performing average card at the top and the worst performing average card on the bottom. You can see that the 1630 actually performed worse than the 1050 Ti and the 1050 in Fortnite here, but the 1630 did actually do better in terms of a 0.1% low than the 1050, presumably because of the extra VRAM that the 1630 has. That said, the 1% low results were pretty much identical during my benchmark in this area of the map, the Tilted Towers area. The 1050 Ti still came out on top with a clear advantage over both cards in terms of an average. In Forza Horizon 5, the game performed okay across all of the cards actually. This sort of marked a return to what I expected to see throughout the majority of these tests, with the 1050 Ti on top and the 1630 in the middle of the 1050 and 1050 Ti. Not quite 60 frames per second with the 1630, but the 1.1% lows were pretty solid, which can be said across the board with this result. Forza is a very well optimised game and it runs quite nicely at medium with all of the cards in today's benchmark tests. Finally here we have GTA San Andreas Definitive Edition, 1080p with the low preset. The 1050 Ti once again came out on top, and the 1050 and 1630 were actually tied for second with 64 frames per second apiece here, although the 1050 did exhibit a better 1% low, which again was unexpected, but there we go. This isn't really a difference that can necessarily be felt in the game, especially since the 0.1% lows were identical. But overall, the 1050, I would say, did have the slight edge in terms of this title, with the 1050 Ti once again being the clear winner. Overall, I guess this video sort of reiterates my findings on the 1630. Most of the time, it will sit between the 1050 and 1050 Ti. The 1050 has actually proved itself quite capable once again in 2022, despite having just 2 gigs of VRAM. I guess the amount of VRAM doesn't really matter all too much with these lower end cards, but there we go. The 1050 Ti is still a pretty solid purchase if you are on a tight budget, and I guess the 1630 is worth a buy if, for whatever reason, it was being sold second hand for under £100 or dollars or euros, but I think it's probably too early to see that sort of deal just yet. Maybe Nvidia and partners will drop the MSRP at some point soon, but who knows. That said then, I hope you've enjoyed this comparison. It's a follow-up I said I'd make, so if you did, leave a like down below, leave a dislike if you didn't, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.